Hey there, and welcome to AE Academy Volume 2. My name is Cameron, and I am your instructor for this series of training on intermediate techniques inside of After Effects. And we're at the first lesson here. This is the lesson on the graph editor. And we're going to start by just talking about what is the graph editor? What can you do with the graph editor? So here you can see on my timeline, I've got some scale keyframes set up. And if I preview this by hitting 0 on my keyboard, you can see that it scales. It's a simple box, a pink box that scales up and then it scales back down. So we start at a scale of 25%, we scale up to 100% and scale back down 25%. This is known as linear keyframes. And what that means is that the animation starts at 100% speed. It moves into whatever it's going to do. In this case, it's going to scale up to 100%. And then 100% speed goes right back down to 25%. So it is animation, but it's not very interesting animation. So how can we make this animation more interesting? Well, we use something called the graph editor, which we can find right here in our timeline window. If I click on the graph editor, you're going to see that it shows us some graphs of what's going on. So if we look here, we start here at a scale of 25%. We move along up to 100%, back down to 25%. So before we get too far into what we can do with the graph editor, I want to explain to you what is involved in the graph editor. You don't need to know everything about the graph editor, but there are some very important things to understand. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what these tools are down here. Some of them are highlighted, some of them are not. And they're not highlighted because there's no keyframes selected. So these points on the graph here are the keyframes. If I go back here to this keyframe and I turn off the graph editor, you're going to see here is our keyframe that we set for 100% scale. So I'll select this keyframe, and by selecting it, some of these immediately light up. This one in the center does not, but we will come back to that in just a little bit. So with a keyframe selected, we can do things where we can select multiple keyframes by holding down Shift, and now we have 2 keyframes selected. We can move them around, drag them up and down the timeline. By doing this, back here you can see the key has shifted forward. It used to be right here at 1 second. Now it's at 109. So this is just another way to really control our keys. We can also move them down. So what does that mean? So that means that this keyframe that was at 100% is now scaled down to 80%, right? And I could just select this keyframe, by itself. I can hold down the Shift button if I want, and it's going to snap along the vertical axes here. I can bring it right back up to 100%. I can double click this key, and I can set this to a value, very specifically in here. So I'm going to type in 100%. I can click here and unconstrain, and then I could do things where I make it more vertically tall. Let me undo that. I could make it wider like so, but I want this to be 100%. I'm going to tab, hit 100 again, and then hit OK or enter on my keyboard. And so that's one way you can control keyframes without going back here to our normal view that we're used to inside of After Effects. So now you're going to notice that the constrain proportions box is unchecked now because I turned that off when I was inside of this keyframe. Normally it's turned on, and that means that if I scale up the X, it's also scaling the Y. Let me undo that. If I turn it off, I can scale on the width only, and I can scale on the height only. Well, you'll notice that when I'm doing that, you can see now there's a green line here. This green line is representing the Y, the scale for the Y. Okay, so the red line is the scale X, which you can see there in the little yellow dialog box, and the green line represents the scale Y. So let me change this back to 25%. And let me just show you an example of why this might be interesting to try. So to play around with, so let me hit preview again. We're back to our original animation. And here we are. I'm going to select this key. And because we're not on constrained proportions, we've turned that off. I can now do something, a little bit more interesting. Maybe I'll scale this guy up to 150, and we can see that here in our graph editor, right? So instead of having to go over here, I can just stay right inside of here and adjust values as well. So I'm gonna undo that. I'm gonna go back to constrained proportions. Let's go ahead and tighten this up just a little bit. I'm just clicking here and changing my layout. So I'm a little bit more focused here on the graph editor. Okay, so what else can these buttons do? So this is just going to show us different properties. The next one is the different types of graphs that we can look at. So typically you're going to work with value graph or speed graph. You can also hit auto select graph, and that's going to pick which graph it thinks that you want to see. I typically will keep it, for me, just on value or speed. I don't like the auto select feature, but just to show you, we are now on the value graph. If I switch back to speed graph, this is what it looks like. Totally different looking graph, but we will get into this a little bit later about what this actually means. So we'll switch back to the value graph, and you can see down here there's a reference graph, there's waveforms, in and out points, a lot of different options for what you want to view within the graph up here. Next, we have show transform box when multiple keys are selected. So that's what we saw. When I selected both of these keys, we see a transform box right here. If this isn't on, we just see the keys, right? And we can still move them like I am right now, but it's with the transform box, it's a little bit easier to transform them in ways we want to transform them. We also have the snap function. So I'm going to take this key right here, and I'm just going to move it around. You can see it's not really snapping. I can kind of position it wherever I want to position it. I'm going to undo that. If I turn on snap, you can see now it's trying to snap to different places. You can see it kind of popping in there, and it'll try and align itself to different keys, things like that. You can see the lines popping up here to kind of help us snap into place. So that's an interesting one to use as well. I've also got auto zoom graph height, and you're seeing that happen. And it looks like if I drag this keyframe down and I let go, it looks like it's back to the same place. But if you look over here, we're actually about 65% now, whereas before we were at 100% if I undo that. So that is the auto zoom graph height. So if I turn that off, and now I take this back down to, let's say, 60% like we just did, nothing changes, right? So it can kind of throw us off a little bit when this is on, but it is a very good tool to use. So I'm gonna undo that, turn that back on. Next, we have fit selection to view. So let's say that I want to focus on these two keys. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off transform box for now. Let's say I just want to focus on these two keyframes and not this keyframe. What I can do is I can say fit selection to view. So I have both of these keys selected, fit selection to view. There we go. Now I can more easily work on this particular section. If I want to jump back and see everything, all I have to do is click the next box, which is fit all graphs to view. And there we go. We can see all of them again. Okay, so next we have this button that's not highlighted, and this is called separate dimensions. So for this example, I am going to duplicate. I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate. I'm going to turn off our original layer here and lock it. I'm going to go open the keyframes up, which I hit U on the keyboard to show all my keyframes. I'm going to turn off the scale, and I'm going to hit P for position. And I am going to make this a 3D layer, just for an example here. Okay, so now we have our box. It's a 3D layer. There's no keyframe set. This little box down here, separate dimensions, is still turned off. As soon as I set a keyframe, you can see, here we go. Now separate dimensions is available. So enabling separate dimensions immediately puts the X, Y, and Z each on their own keyframeable layer, and it's much easier to control these layers by doing this. So now I can set a keyframe here, I can go back here, and let's say I want to make the X do this, and let's say I want the Y, I select it, and I want Y to be down here, and then Z needs to maybe be back in Z space. Okay. Now all three of them are selected. I can easily move individual keys around on X, Y, and Z, and it's much easier to control them. That is the function of separate dimensions. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Go back to our original scale layer. And I'm going to select. You'll notice here now that nothing is in our graph editor view, and that's because nothing's selected here. So as soon as I select scale, boom, now we can see something. If nothing is selected, nothing shows up here until you select it. So there we go. Let's make sure that we are seeing everything. So we're fit all to view. And then I'm going to select this keyframe and this keyframe. And I want to show you what the different types of keyframes are. So there's essentially a handful of keyframe types that we can select. So the first one is called hold keyframe. So if I click hold keyframe right here, you're gonna see what it does. So it says, okay, at the first frame, it's gonna hold at 25%. And as soon as we hit 1 second, boom, we snap to 100%. And when we get back here to the last one, we're gonna hold until we hit the last keyframe, which is 25%. Boom, there we go. So if I preview this, this is exactly what it looks like, right? So we're at hold keyframes. So I'm going to now select linear, which is the other type of keyframe. So now we're back to how we were. So now we've talked about two different types of keyframes. Okay, we also have convert selected keyframes to an auto Bezier. So for this one, I'm going to select all three keys. And I want you to look at how the shape of this changes when I select auto Bezier. So you can see there, the animation is now smoother. So we have some simple curves up here. We have handles going on. What I can do now is I can take things and I can select these different handles here, and I can really fine tune the shape of my curve, and I can completely change the way that this thing moves. Right, so I'm gonna hold down shift, and by holding down shift, I'm locking that handle in there. And we're gonna say, hey, let's come out real slow, zoom into this, and then back out. Now we'll get more into this when we dive into the value and the speed graphs, but this is just an example of what you can do with the tools inside the graph editor. So I'm gonna select all three keys again, switch it back to linear, and there we are. We're back to just the boring old in and out of scale. We also have an option here for easy ease, okay? And so I select that, and you can see that the curves are a little bit different. Now we're coming out a little bit slow, moving in, back out. This is a little bit different than auto Bezier. And watch again down here, especially watch this one and this one. Watch what happens. These handles will get shorter. These handles will pretty much be non-existent. So not as smooth of motion, coming in and out. Easy ease. We also have easy ease in. And you'll see what happens. Let's change this back to linear again, and let's go easy ease in. So what happens here is this first keyframe is just 100% speed out. This one's going to ease in. It's going to go out 100%. It's going to ease in again here. We'll go back to linear, and we're going to go easy ease out. So now it's the opposite effect. Like I said, we will come back in the next couple lessons and dive into these more deeply. This is just how you use the keys. Something else I want to show you really quickly is if we want to select a key like this, this little button on here says edit selected keyframes. So we can also open this up and we can change things here to like hold keyframe. We can change it to easy ease in and out. We can mess with things like interpolation, all the stuff which we're going to get into in the next lesson coming up on the speed graph.